thank you very much indeed.
You need to balance this out.
So, I must admit, I can't remember the precise title of this panel, but it's World Affairs. Let's call it that. And for World Affairs, we have a fantastic panel to discuss it all. Straight from one of the world's, unfortunately, one of the world's hotspots, we have Lina Naseba, Minister of State for the UAE. We have Subramanian Jaishankar, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for India, one of the kind of most respected voices on the diplomatic planet, and Minna Valtonen, the Finnish Foreign Affairs Minister. So thank you all very much indeed. Mr. Jaishankar, if I could start with you. I think India's position, everybody's obviously one of the world's big powers, so what you do matters. And in Europe, people have been a bit equivocal about India's position on the Russia-Ukraine war. Why aren't you more committed to the Ukraine fight? Now you have another big war close at hand in Iran and so on. Explain to the audience here, you're sitting in Delhi, how do you see the challenges posed by those two conflicts and India's national interests and how you're trying to steer them?
Mostly countries are committed to wars they fight and are equivocal about ones which they observe, as a general proposition.
Yeah.
So I can think of a lot of wars close to us where the rest of the world is quite equivocal. In this particular case, here's the challenge. You have, for the sake of simplicity, four parties, which is US, Israel, Iran. I'm using the Gulf as a part, though I accept they have a very differentiated position. And we have extremely good, extremely strong relations with all of them. So when you have then that situation, clearly your response...
So to clarify, that includes Iran. You regard yourself as having good, strong relations with Iran?
Yes, we have good relations, very substantial relations with Iran.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying the same. I'm not saying the four relationships are of the same quality. I mean, for example, clearly where the Gulf is concerned, we have 10 million Indians living in the Gulf. The largest number of Indian nationals who live outside India are actually in the UAE.
Right.
The Gulf countries are our primary energy suppliers. Many of them would be among our top 10 trading partners. I mean, if I use UAE as an example, you have a big community, huge trade, significant energy relationship, and in fact, much more than that, close defense and security relationship as well. So the challenge is in a quadrilateral situation where you have equities, arguably of a different order in each account. How do you manage them while addressing this conflict?
Yeah.
And
are you feeling the domestic consequences of the war already? Because I think India's been unusually vocal in saying, look, the rising energy prices are driving people into poverty.
Yes, because, when you are a low income or a low middle income country, then as indeed happened after the Ukraine war as well, an increase in energy prices hits a low-income country much more than it does a middle-income or a high-income country. And
are you just stuck in the role of kind of frustrated observer, or is there much you can do to try to help?
Well, I think at this time, much of the world is stuck in the position of a frustrated observer. But a lot of countries are trying to do what they can in this situation. Yeah. So it's not for want of trying. I mean, I'm talking about us alone, but I think, certainly there are not that many countries who would have relations, decent relations with all the parties involved. So clearly, we've sort of reasoned with the countries. We've been in touch with them. We hope very much that the U.S.-Iran negotiation leads to an early outcome.
Yeah.
And the continuation of the fighting is creating problems.
Yeah, and we're in Finland, so I have to obviously ask you about the Russia-Ukraine war. I think in Europe there was a feeling that India adopted what we would regard as a kind of moral equivalence between the two sides, that you were saying, well, it's a big shame, but maybe they should stop, but you were too sympathetic towards Russia, too willing to buy oil from Russia. So how would you explain that position to the people here?
Well, I'd make two observations. I buy oil. I buy oil based on cost and availability. So at that point of time, much of the oil available on the market was Russian, because Europeans were essentially buying up the Middle East oil, which was our traditional supply. So circumstances pushed us in a certain direction. But since you spoke about moral ambiguity, I would say this, no European country has been attacked with Indian weapons. I wish I could say that for European weapons vis-à-vis India. So keep that in mind.
Be more explicit so that people understand what you're saying.
Europeans sell weapons which are used to attack India. Not now, for many, many years. We Indians have never done anything to endanger Europe. So I think that's a reasonable point.
Okay. Minister Naseba, I mean, you are right, in the front line. And we were all hoping for a peace settlement, but it looks like the war's flared up again. How do things seem viewed from the UAE? In the earlier panel, they're saying this war's going on for a while.
Thank you for the question. Thank you to the host for having us. It's been a really quiet time in my part of the world, as you've observed.
That's why you came here.
That's why I came here. I had not much to do, and this looked like an interesting way to debate some of the policy decisions we make often at such a rapid pace. I think that's one of the fundamental changes in how we make our decisions today that has had impact. The pace of which we gather information, that we look at disinformation, and we make policy decisions has had a very enormous impact on being able to debate those outcomes in a measured way. I'd really like to also thank both of you because you're doing a lot of my work for me today. The Ambassadors Forum, the UAE Ambassadors Forum is meeting in Abu Dhabi today, and they asked me to address it from my hotel room in Helsinki last night. I said I have far better practitioners sitting on the panel here today, so you are being webcast into the UAE Global Ambassadors Forum, so thank you for doing that as well. But it is a critical time that our ambassadors are meeting, and they are hearing a number of our leaders address them about some of the key takeaways that the last 100 days have shown us as a country, as we have faced, if you imagine Helsinki or New Delhi, facing over 3,000 drones and missiles in the space of 100 days, in a country that has been geared towards relative peace and prosperity for quite a number of decades. I think you can imagine the enormity of the shock that we've had to absorb in being able to adapt to that and to be resilient in those circumstances. So the first takeaway has been that the investment we have made in being resilient as a society, as an economy, but also in terms of our military capacity has paid off. That has really paid off, and that has been over a decade in the making. I think you've seen that we've responded to over 90% of those attacks successfully. And I see many of my colleagues, but also from the UN in New York, but also many ambassadors who have lived through that in the UAE, who have felt that the UAE protected them as if they were, like the Indian community, home. I think that's the other key takeaway about the UAE lesson and the model, is that it has been a one society response to this crisis. And it strikes me as I sit in Finland that has a very long border with a dominating regional hegemon, that there are more similarities in our region and in Europe today that have come to the fore in the last 2-3 years than perhaps we first realize when we look at each other across the waters, or when we take flights to each other's countries and when we visit each other's museums. There are a lot more similarities in the way the international system functions or misfunctions. And I think that's my second takeaway. And I heard this a lot in the very good opening remarks today from President Stubb and from President Ruto, that ultimately we're all in this room vested in this international system. It matters to us. What is playing out, or what has played out in Ukraine, and I remember that India and the UAE were actually on the Security Council when that disruption or that rupture or that disorder happened in 2022. We were on the Security Council together looking at how the international system would respond. We were also facing similar disruptions in the Middle East, in Africa, with each continent, to a degree, saying, this is not my war. And I think that is the takeaway theme for me about the failures of policymaking and leadership, in fact, that has led to this trust deficit. It was only recently that we heard a European leader talk about the Iran war as not our war. And therefore, it shouldn't be surprising to a degree when the Ukraine war is not seen as our war in the African continent or the Middle East, and when other horrific conflicts that are raging in Africa are not seen as our war across the ocean. And I think that fundamentally is what has to change. That is fundamentally what has to change. It's another takeaway from this period. Because what is playing out in the Strait of Hormuz today, a waterway that, again, earlier the president of Kenya said wasn't even on his radar, which I think is true for many people in this audience. What is playing out in the Strait of Hormuz today is fundamentally a test of this international system. It is a test of freedom of navigation. It is a test of the concept of trade as a global public good. It threatens, as Dr. Jaishankar has said, a fifth of the world's energy supply. The UN has estimated upward of 45 million facing famine as a result. It's a third of the world's fertilizer supply. Many countries have not been able to lay down harvest for food, so food security is at jeopardy. It's $500 billion of container traffic. This is global trade being tested in a narrow strait that is 40 kilometers from us. Iran is a neighbor of 40 kilometers from us at our closest points. And I think how this plays out will have implications for other straits, and this has been said by many of the practitioners in this room. But it will fundamentally have implications for how we respond as an international system. For us, it's partnerships, and it's partnerships that President Ruto said are defined as partnerships, not necessarily alliances, and I think Dr. Jaishankar said that. Yeah. It's resilience, it's alternative routes, and it's the international system.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about resilience and you sound admirably calm for somebody, in the middle of a war zone. But one of the things that people have also said is that the UAE in particular, it's had this golden era, incredibly high international profile, Dubai, the safest city in the world, money, coming in, and that you do have resilience and you could survive it for a while. But the longer the war goes on, the more the threat to your model, for such an international city. So how much longer can you kind of cope with a situation like this without it taking a real toll on the UAE?
Thank you for the question, and I think it's a fair one. And I would say that is actually the answer to the question many of us, why did the UAE face over 60% of the strikes in the region, having not been responsible or part of the initial US-Israeli operations that began the spate of the conflict? And I think the answer to that is exactly what you've just said, Gideon. It's the model. The model represents an alternative for the region and globally that is, as you said, calm, that is ambitious, that is creative. Much like Finland, it's entrepreneurial with what it has, with the size of its population, with its income and its resources. We're not quite the number 10 years in a row happiest country on earth yet, but we've strived to be a country that has focused on innovation, that has focused on prosperity, that has focused on healthcare, on AI, on investment, on infrastructure, and trade. And I think that model is what is under threat today, which is why in our defense, much as Ukraine has defined its defense as existential, I think the UAE sees the defense of this model, not of our country.